Chapter 12. This is no game for old men. Send in the boys. W. Hayes. I don't know how Tanda transported us from Kla to Diva. If I did, we wouldn't have needed her. All I know is that at the appropriate time, she commenced to chant and shift her shoulders, a fascinating process in itself, and we were there. There, in this case, was the bazaar at Diva. That phrase alone, however, does not begin to describe our new surroundings as they came into focus. A long time ago, the dimension of Diva had undergone an economic collapse. To survive, the Deviles, who I once knew as devils, used their ability to travel the dimensions and become merchants. Through the process of natural selection, the most successful Deviles were not the best fighters, but the best traders. Now, after countless generations of this process, the Deviles were acknowledged as the best merchants in all the dimensions. They were also acknowledged as being the shrewdest, coldest, most profit-hungry cheats ever to come down the pike. The bazaar at Diva was their showcase. It was an all-day, all-night, year-round fair where the Deviles met to haggle with each other over the wares fetched back from the various dimensions. Though it was originally established and maintained by Deviles, it was not unusual to find travelers from many dimensions shopping the endless rows of displays and booths. The rule of thumb was, if it's to be found anywhere, you'll find it at the bazaar at Diva. I had been here once before with Aahz. At the time, we were searching for a surprise weapon to use against Istvan. What we ended up with was Gleep and Tanda. Distractions abound at the bazaar. I mention this in part to explain why, as unusual as our foursome must have appeared, no one paid us the slightest attention as we stood watching the kaleidoscope of activity whirling about us. Gleep pressed against me for reassurance, momentarily taken aback at the sudden change of surroundings. I ignored him. My first visit to this place had been far too brief for my satisfaction. As such, I was rubbernecking madly, trying to see as much as possible as fast as possible. Tanda was more businesslike. "Now that we're here, Aahz," she drawled, "do you know where we're going?" "No," Aahz admitted, "but I'll find out right now." Without further warning, he casually reached out and grabbed the arm of the nearest passerby, a short, ugly fellow with tusks. Spinning his chosen victim around, Aahz bent to scowl in his face. "You," he snarled. "Do you like to fight?" For a moment my heart stopped. All we needed now was to get into a brawl. Fortunately, instead of producing a weapon, the tusker gave ground a step and eyed our party suspiciously. "Not with a pervert backed by a dragon, I don't," he retorted cautiously. "Good," Aahz smiled. "Then if you wanted to hire someone to do your fighting for you, where would you go?" "To the bazaar at Diva?" the tusker shrugged. "I know that," Aahz snarled. "But where at the bazaar?" "Oh," the tusker exclaimed with sudden understanding. "About 20 rows in that direction, then turn right for another 30 or so. That's where the mercenaries hang out." 20, then up 30, Aahz repeated carefully. "Thanks." "A finder's fee would be appreciated more than any thanks," the tusker smiled, extending a palm. "You're right," Aahz agreed, and turned his back on our benefactor. The tusker hesitated for a moment, then shrugged and continued on his way. I could have told him that perverts in general, and Aahz specifically, are not noted for their generosity. "We go 20 rows that way, then up 30, Aahz informed us. "Yeah, we heard," Tanda grimaced. "Why didn't you just ask him flat out?" "My way is quicker," Aahz replied smugly. "Is it?" I asked skeptically. "Look, kid," Aahz scowled. "Do you want to lead us through this zoo?" "Well..." I hesitated. Then shut up and let me do it, okay? Actually, I was more than willing to let Aahz lead the way to wherever it was we were going. For one thing, it kept him busy navigating a path through the crowd. For another, it left me with next to nothing to do except marvel at the sights of the bazaar as I followed along in his wake. Try as I might, though, there was just too much for one set of eyes to see. In one booth, two Devils argued with an elephant-headed being over a skull. At least, I think it was a skull. In another, a Devil was putting on a demonstration for a mixed group of shoppers, summoning clouds of floating green bubbles from a tiny wooden box. At one point, our path was all but blocked by a booth selling rings which shot bolts of lightning. Between the salesman's demonstrations and the customers trying out their purchases, the way was virtually impassable. Aahz and Tanda never broke stride, however, confidently maintaining their pace as they walked through the thick of the bolts. Miraculously, they passed through unscathed. Gritting my teeth, I seized one of Gleep's ears and followed in their footsteps. Again, the bolts of energy failed to find us. Apparently, no Devil would bring injury or allow anyone in his shop to bring injury to a potential customer. It was a handy fact to know. The lightning rings brought something else to mind, however. The last time we parted company with Tanda, Aahz had given her a ring that shot a heat ray capable of frying a man-sized target on the spot. That's right, I said he gave it to her. You might think this was proof of the depth of his feelings for her. It's my theory he was sick. Anyway, I was reminded of the ring and curious as to what had become of it. Increasing my pace slightly, I closed the distance between myself and the pair in the lead, only to find they were already deeply engrossed in conversation. The din that prevails at the bazaar stymies any attempt at serious eavesdropping, but I managed to catch occasional bits and pieces of the conversation as we walked. Heard awfully expensive, aren't they? Tanda was saying. Lick their weight and... Aahz replied smugly. I moved in a little closer, trying to hear better. Makes you think they've got anyone here? Tanda asked. With the number of bars here? Aahz retorted. The way I hear it, this is one of their main... I lost the rest of that argument. A knee-high tentacled mass suddenly scuttled across my boots and ducked through a tent flap, closely pursued by two very frustrated-looking Devils. I ignored the chase and the following screams, hurrying to catch up with Aahz and Tanda again. Apparently, they were discussing mercenaries, and I wanted to hear as much as possible, both to further my education and because I might have to lead them into battle eventually. Find them, Tanda was asking. All we have is a general area. Easy, Aahz replied confidently. Just listen for the singing. Singing? Tanda was skeptical. It's their trademark, Aahz pronounced. It also lands them in most of their... A Devil stepped in front of me, proudly displaying a handful of seeds. He threw them on the ground with a flourish, and a dense black thorn bush sprang up to block my path. Terrific. Normally I would have been fascinated, but at the moment I was in a hurry. Without even pausing to upbraid the Devil, I took to the air, desperation giving wings to my feet, desperation assisted by a little levitation. I cleared the thorn bush easily, touched down lightly on the far side, and was practically trampled by Gleep as he burst through the barrier. Gleep, he said, cocking his head at me curiously. I picked myself up from the dust where I had been knocked by his enthusiasm and cuffed him. Watch where you're going next time, I ordered angrily. He responded by snaking out his long tongue and licking my face. His breath was devastating, and his tongue left a trail of slime. Obviously, my admonishment had terrified him. Heaving a deep sigh, I sprinted off after Aahz, with Gleep lumbering along in hot pursuit. I was just overtaking them when Aahz stopped suddenly in his tracks and started to turn. Unable to halt my headlong sprint, I plowed into him, knocking him sprawling. "In a hurry, handsome?" Tanda asked, eyeing me slyly. "Gee, Aahz," I stammered, bending over him. "I didn't mean to—" From a half-sitting position, his hand lashed out in a cuff that spun me halfway around. "Watch where you're going next time," he growled. "Gleep," said the dragon, and licked my face. Either my head was spinning more than I thought, or I had been through this scene before. "Now quit clowning around and listen, kid." Aahz was on his feet again, and all business. "Here's where we part company for a while. You wait here while I go haggle with the mercenaries." "Gee, Aahz," I whined. "Can't I—" "No, you can't," he said firmly. "The crew I'm going after is sharp. All we need is one of your dumb questions in the middle of negotiations and they'll triple their prices." "But—" I began. "You will wait here," Aahz ordered. "I repeat, wait. No fights, no window shopping for dragons. Just wait." "I'll stay here with him, Aahz," Tanda volunteered. "Good," Aahz nodded. "And try to keep him out of trouble, okay?" With that, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Actually, I wasn't too disappointed. I mean, I would have liked to have gone with him, but I liked having some time alone with Tanda even more. That is, if you can consider standing in the middle of the bazaar at Diva being alone with someone. "Well, Tanda," I said, flashing my brightest smile. "Later, handsome," she replied briskly. "Right now I've got some errands to run." "Errands?" I blinked. "Yeah, Aahz is big on manpower, but I'd just as soon have a few extra tricks up my sleeve in case the going gets rough," she explained. "I'm going to duck over to the special effects section and see what they have in stock." "Okay," I agreed. "Let's go." "No, you don't," she said, shaking her head. "I think I'd better go this one alone. The kind of places I have in mind aren't fit for civilized customers. You and the dragon wait here." "But you're supposed to be keeping me out of trouble," I argued. "And that's why I'm not taking you along," she said, smiling. "Now, what do you have along in the way of weaponry?" "Well," I said hesitantly, "there's a sort of a sword in one of Gleep's packs." "Fine," she said. "Get it out and wear it. It'll keep the riffraff at a distance. Then, wait for me in there." She pointed at a strange-looking stone structure with a peeling sign on its front. "What is it?" I asked, peering at it suspiciously. "It's a Yellow Crescent Inn," she explained. "It's sort of a restaurant. Get yourself something to eat. The food's unappetizing, but vaguely digestible." I studied the place for a moment. "Actually," I decided finally, "I think I'd rather—" Right about there I discovered I was talking to myself. Tanda had disappeared without a trace. For the second time in my life, I was alone in the bazaar at Diva. Chapter 13. Hold the pickles, hold the lettuce. Henry VIII. Fascinating as the bazaar is, facing it alone can be rather frightening. Being particularly susceptible to fear, I decided to follow Tanda's advice and entered the inn. First, however, I took the precaution of tethering Gleep to the inn's hitching post and unpacking the sword. We had one decent sword. Unfortunately, Aahz was currently wearing it. That left me with Garkin's old sword, a weapon which has been sneered at by demon and demon hunter alike. Still, its weight was reassuring on my hip, though it might have been more reassuring if I had known anything about how to handle it. Unfortunately, my lessons with Aahz to date had not included swordsmanship. I could only hope it would not be apparent to the casual observer that this was my first time to wear a sword. Pausing in the door, I surveyed the inn's interior. Unaccustomed as I was to gracious dining, I realized in a flash that this wasn't it. One of the few pieces of advice my farmer father had given me before I ran away from home was not to trust any inn or restaurant that appeared overly clean. He maintained the cleaner a place was, the more dubious the quality and origin of their food would be. If he were even vaguely right, this inn must be the bottom of the barrel. It was not only clean, it gleamed. I do not mean that figuratively. Harsh overhead lights glinted off a haphazard arrangement of tiny tables and uncomfortable-looking chairs constructed of shiny metal and a hard white substance I didn't recognize. At the far end of the inn was a counter behind which stood a large stone gargoyle, the only decorative feature in the place. Behind the gargoyle was a door, presumably leading into the kitchen. There was a small window in the door through which I caught a glimpse of the food being prepared. Preparation consisted of passing patties of meat over a stove, cramming them into a split roll, slopping a variety of colored pastes on top of the meat, and wrapping the whole mess in a piece of paper. Watching this process confirmed my earlier fears. I do all the cooking for Aahz and myself, as I did before that for Garkin and myself, and before that just for myself. While I have no delusions as to the high quality of my cooking, I do know that what they were doing to that meat could only yield a meal the consistency and flavor of charred glove leather. Despite the obvious low quality of the food, the inn seemed nearly full of customers. I noticed this out of the corner of my eye. I also noticed that a high percentage of them were staring at me. It occurred to me that this was probably because I had been standing in the door for some time without entering, while working up my courage to go in. Feeling slightly embarrassed, I stepped inside and let the door swing shut behind me. With fiendish accuracy, the door closed on my sword, pinning it momentarily and forcing me to break stride clumsily as I started forward. So much for my image as a swordsman. Humiliated, I avoided looking at the other customers and made my way hurriedly to the inn's counter. I wasn't sure what I was going to do once I got there, since I didn't trust the food, but hopefully people would stop staring at me if I went through the motions of ordering. Still trying to avoid eye contact with anyone, I made a big show of studying the gargoyle. There was a grinding noise, and the statue turned its head to return my stare. It wasn't a statue. They really had a gargoyle tending the counter. The gargoyle seemed to be made of coarse gray stone, and when he flexed his wings, small pieces of crushed rock and dust showered silently to the floor. His hands were taloned, and there were curved spikes growing out of his elbows. The only redeeming feature I could see was his smile, which in itself was a bit unnerving. Dominating his wrinkled face, the smile seemed permanently etched in place, stretching well past his ears and displaying a set of pointed teeth even longer than Aahz's. "Take your order?" the gargoyle asked politely, the smile never twitching. I said, taking a step back. "I'll have to think about it. There's so much to choose from." In actuality, I couldn't read the menu, if that's what it was. There was something etched in the wall behind the gargoyle in a language I couldn't decipher. I assume it was a menu because the prices weren't etched in the wall, but written in chalk over many erasures. The gargoyle shrugged. "Suit yourself," he said indifferently. "When you make up your mind, just holler. The name's Gus." "I'll do that, Gus," I smiled, backing slowly toward the door. Though it was my intent to exit quietly and wait outside with Gleep, things didn't work out that way. Before I had taken 4 steps, a hand fell on my shoulder. "Skeeve, isn't it?" a voice proclaimed. I spun around, or started to. I was brought up short when my sword banged into a table leg. My head kept moving, however, and I found myself face to face with an imp. "Brockhurst!" I exclaimed, recognizing him immediately.
"I thought I recognized you when you—" "Hey!"
The imp took a step backward and raised his hands defensively.
"Take it easy. I'm not looking for any trouble."
My hand had gone to my sword hilt in an involuntary effort to free it from the table leg. Apparently, Brockhurst had interpreted the gesture as an effort to draw my weapon. That was fine by me. Brockhurst had been one of Istvan's lieutenants, and we hadn't parted on the best of terms. Having him a little afraid of my ready sword was probably a good thing.
"I don't hold any grudges," Brockhurst continued insistently. "That was just a job. Right now I'm between jobs. Permanently."
The last was added with a note of bitterness which piqued my curiosity. "Things haven't been going well?" I asked cautiously. The imp grimaced.
"That's an understatement. Come on, sit down. I'll buy you a milkshake and tell you all about it."
I wasn't certain what a milkshake was, but I was sure I didn't want one if they were sold here. Thanks anyway, Brockhurst," I said, forcing a smile, "but I think I'll pass." The imp arched an eyebrow at me.
"Still a little suspicious, eh?" he murmured. "Well, can't say as I blame you. Tell you what we'll do."
Before I could stop him, he strolled to the counter.
"Hey, Gus," he called. "Mind if I take an extra cup?"
"Actually," the gargoyle began.
"Thanks."
Brockhurst was already on his way back, bearing his prize with him, some kind of a thin-sided, flimsy canister. Plopping down at a nearby table, he beckoned to me, indicating the seat opposite him with a wave of his hand. There was no gracious course for me to follow other than to join him, though it would later occur to me I had no real obligation to be gracious. Moving carefully to avoid knocking anything over with my sword, I maneuvered my way to the indicated seat. Apparently, Brockhurst had been sitting here before, as there was already a canister on the table identical to the one he had fetched from the counter. The only difference was that the one on the table was 3/4 full of a curious pink liquid. With great ceremony, the imp picked up the canister from the table and poured half its contents into the new vessel. The liquid poured with the consistency of swamp muck.
"Here,"
he said, pushing one of the canisters across the table to me.
"Now you don't have to worry about any funny business with the drinks. We're both drinking the same thing."
With that, he raised his vessel in a mock toast and took a healthy swallow from it. Apparently, he expected me to do the same. I would have rather sucked blood. It's hard to believe things aren't going well for you," I stalled. "You look well enough." For a change, I was actually sincere. Brockhurst looked good, even for an imp. As Aahz had said, imps are snappy dressers, and Brockhurst was no exception. He was outfitted in a rust-colored velvet jerkin trimmed with gold, which set off his pink complexion and sleek black hair superbly. If he were starving, you couldn't tell it from looking at him. Though still fairly slender, he was as well-muscled and adroit as when I had first met him.
"Don't let appearances fool you," Brockhurst insisted, shaking his head. "You see before you an imp pushed to the wall. I've had to sell everything. My crossbow, my pouch of magic tricks. I couldn't even raise enough money to pay my dues to the Assassin's Guild."
"It's that hard to find work?" I sympathized.
"I'll tell you, Skeeve," he whispered confidentially. "I haven't worked since that fiasco with Istvan."
The sound of that name still sent chills down my back. "Where is Istvan, anyway?" I asked casually.
"Don't worry about him," Brockhurst said grimly. We left him working concession stands on the Isle of Coney, a couple of dimensions from here.
What happened to the others? I was genuinely curious. I hadn't had much of a chance to talk with Tonda since our reunion.
We left Frumple under a cloud of birds in some park or other. Figured he looked better as a statue than he did alive. The demon hunter and the girl took off for parts unknown, one night while we were asleep. My partner, Higgins, headed back to Impair. He figured his career was over and that he might as well settle down. Me, I've been looking for work ever since, and I'm starting to think Higgins was right.
Come on, Brockhurst, I chided. There must be something you can do. I mean, this is the bazaar. The imp heaved a sigh and took another sip of his drink.
It's nice of you to say that, Skeeve, he smiled. But I've got to face the facts. There's not a big demand for imps anyway, and none at all for an imp with no powers.
I knew what he meant. All the dimension travelers I had met so far, Aahz, Istvan, Tonda, and even the Deville Frumple, seemed to regard imps as inferior beings. The nicest thing I had heard said about them was that they were styleless imitators of the Devilles. I felt sorry for him. Despite the fact we had first met as enemies, it wasn't that long ago I had been a loser nobody wanted. You've got to keep trying, I encouraged. Somewhere there's someone who wants to hire you.
Not very likely, the imp grimaced. The way I am now, I wouldn't hire me. Would you?
Sure I would, I insisted. In a minute.
Oh, well, he sighed. I shouldn't dwell on myself. How have things been with you? What brings you to the bazaar?
Now it was my turn to grimace. Aahz and I are in a bad spot, I explained. We're here trying to recruit a force to help us out.
You're hiring people?
Brockhurst was suddenly intense. Yeah, why? I replied. Too late, I realized what I was saying.
Then you weren't kidding about hiring me.
Brockhurst was beside himself with glee. I said.
This is great,
the imp chortled, rubbing his hands together.
Believe me, Skeeve, you won't regret this.
I was regretting it already. Wait a minute, Brockhurst, I interrupted desperately. There are a few things you should know about the job.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, the odds are bad, I said judiciously. We're up against an army. That's pretty rough fare considering how low the pay is. I thought I would touch a nerve with that remark about the pay. I was right.
How low is the pay?
The imp asked bluntly. Now I was stuck. I didn't have the vaguest idea how much mercenaries were normally paid. We couldn't offer you more than 1 gold piece for the whole job, I shrugged.
Done, Brockhurst proclaimed. With the current state of my finances, I can't turn down an offer like that, no matter how dangerous it is.
It occurred to me that sometime I should have Aahz give me a quick course in rates of exchange. There's one other problem, I murmured thoughtfully.
What's that?
Well, my partner, you remember Aahz? The imp nodded. Well, he's out right now trying to hire a force, and he's got the money. I continued. There's a good chance that if he's successful, and he usually is, there won't be enough money left to hire you. Brockhurst pursed his lips for a moment, then shrugged.
Well, he said, I'll take the chance. I wasn't going anywhere anyway. As I said, they haven't exactly been beating my door down with job offers.
I had run out of excuses. Well, I smiled lamely, as long as you're aware.
Heads up, boss,
the imp's murmur interrupted me.
We've got company.
I'm not sure which one worried me more, Brockhurst calling me boss, or the spectre-like character who had just stepped up to our table. Chapter 14. We're looking for a few good men. Butch Cassidy. For a moment, I thought we were being confronted by a skeleton. Then I looked closer and realized there really was skin stretched over the bones, though its dusty white color made it seem very dead indeed. The figure's paleness was made even more corpse-like by the blue-black hooded robe that enshrouded it. It wasn't until I noticed the wrinkled face with a short, bristly white beard that I realized our visitor was actually a very old man. Very old. He looked weak to the point of near collapse, desperately clutching a twisted black walking staff, which seemed to be the only thing keeping him erect. Still, his eyes were bright and his smile confident as he stood regarding us. "Did I hear you boys right?" he asked in a crackling voice.
"I beg your pardon?"
Brockhurst scowled at him. The ancient figure sneered and raised his voice. "I said, did I hear you boys right?" he barked. "What's the matter, are you deaf?"
Excuse me," I interrupted hastily. "Before we can answer you, we have to know what you thought we said."
The old man thought for a minute, then bobbed his head in a sudden nod. "You know you're right," he cackled. "Pretty smart, young fella." He began to list, but caught himself before he fell. "Thought I heard you tell Pinko here you were looking for a force to take on an army," he pronounced, jerking a thumb at Brockhurst.
"The name's Brockhurst, not Pinko," the imp snarled.
"All right, Bratwurst," the old man nodded. "No need to get your dander up."
"That's Brockhurst."
"You heard right," I interrupted again, hoping the old man would go away as soon as his curiosity was satisfied. "Good," the man declared. "Count me in. Me and Blackie haven't been in a good fight for a long time."
"How long is that in centuries?"
Brockhurst sneered. "Watch your mouth, Bratwurst," the old man warned. "We may be old, but we can still teach you a thing or two about winning wars." "Who's Blackie?" I asked, cutting off Brockhurst's reply. In reply, the old man drew himself erect, well, nearly erect, and patted his walking staff. "This is Blackie," he announced proudly. "The finest bow ever to come from Archaya, and that takes in a lot of fine bows." I realized with a start that the walking staff was a bow, unstrung, with its bowstring wrapped around it. It was unlike any bow I had ever seen, lumpy and uneven, but polished to a sheen that seemed to glimmer with a life all its own.
"Wait a minute."
Brockhurst was suddenly attentive.
"Did you say you come from Archaya?"
"That I did," the old man grinned. "Ajax the name, fightin's my game. Ain't seen a war yet that could lay old Ajax low, and I've seen a lot of 'em."
Could you excuse us for just a minute, sir?"
Brockhurst smiled apologetically. "Sure, son," Ajax nodded. "Take your time." I couldn't understand the imp's sudden change in attitude, but he seemed quite intense as he jerked his head at me, so I leaned close to hear what he had to say.
"Hire him, boss,"
he hissed in my ear. "What?" I gasped, not believing I had heard him right.
"I said hire him," the imp repeated. "I may not have much to offer you, but I can give you advice. Right now, my advice is to hire him."
"But he's
from Archaya,"
Brockhurst interrupted.
"Boss, that dimension invented archery. You don't find many genuine archers of any age for hire. If you really got a war on your hands, hire him. He could tip the balance for us."
"If he's that good," I whispered back. "Can we afford him?" "1 gold piece will be adequate," Ajax smiled toothily, adding his head to our conference. "I accept your offer."
"Excellent," Brockhurst beamed.
"Wait a minute," I shrieked desperately. "I have a partner that—" I know, Ajax sighed, holding up a restraining hand. "I heard when you told Bratwurst here."
"That's Brockhurst," the imp growled, but he did it smiling.
"If your partner can't find help, then we're hired," the old man laughed, shaking his head. "It's a mite strange, but these are strange times." "You can say that again," I muttered. I was beginning to think I had spoken too loud in my conversation with Brockhurst. "One thing you should know, though, youngster," Ajax murmured confidentially. "I'm being followed." "By who?" I asked. "Don't rightly know," he admitted. "Haven't figured it out yet. It's the little blue fella in the corner behind me." I craned my neck to look at the indicated corner. It was empty. "What fella? I mean fellow," I corrected myself. Ajax whipped his head around with a speed that belied his frail appearance. "Dang it," he cursed. "He did it again. I'm telling you, youngster, that's why I can't figure out what he's after." Sure, Ajax," I said soothingly. "You'll catch him next time." Terrific. An imp with no powers, and now an old archer who sees things. My thoughts were interrupted by a gentle tap on my shoulder. I turned to find the gargoyle looming over me. "Your order's ready, sir," he said through his perma-smile. "My order?" "Yes, if you'll step this way." "There must be some mistake," I began. "I didn't—" The gargoyle was already gone, lumbering back to his counter. I considered ignoring him. Then I considered his size and countenance, and decided I should straighten out this misunderstanding in a polite fashion. "Excuse me," I told my charges. "I'll be right back."
"Don't worry about us, boss,"
Brockhurst waved. I wasn't reassured. I managed to make my way to the counter without banging my sword against anything or anyone, a feat that raised my spirits for the first time that afternoon. Thus bolstered, I approached the gargoyle. I don't recall ordering anything," I stated politely. "Don't blame you either," the gargoyle growled through his smile. "Beats me how anyone or anything can eat the slop they serve here." "But that was just to get you away from those two," the gargoyle shrugged. "You see, I'm shy." "Shy about what?" "About asking you for a job, of course." I decided I would definitely have to keep my voice down in the future. My quiet conversation with Brockhurst seemed to have attracted the attention of half the bazaar. "Look, Gus," the gargoyle supplied. "Yes, well, Gus, I'm really not hiring—" "I know, your partner is," Gus interrupted. "But you're here and he isn't, so I figured I'd make our pitch to you before the second team roster is completely filled." "Oh," I said, not knowing what else to say. "The way I see it," the gargoyle continued, "we could do you a lot of good. You're a clod, aren't you?" "I'm from Claw," I acknowledged stiffly. "Well, if my memory serves me correctly, warfare in that dimension isn't too far advanced technologically." "We have crossbows and catapults," I informed him. "At least, the other side does." "That's what I said," Gus agreed. "Primitive. To stop that force, all you need is air support and a little firepower. We can supply both, and we'll work cheap, both of us for 1 gold piece." Now I was sure I had underestimated the market value of gold pieces. Still, the price was tempting. "I don't know, Gus," I said cagily. Ajax there is supposed to be a pretty good archer."
"Archers," the gargoyle snorted. "I'm talking about real firepower, the kind my partner can give you."
"Who is your partner?" I asked. "He isn't short and blue by any chance, is he?"
"Nah," Gus replied, pointing to the far corner. "That's the gremlin. He came in with the archer."
"A gremlin?" I said, following his finger. Sure enough, perched on a chair in the corner was a small elfish character. Mischievous eyes danced in his soft blue face as he nodded to me in silent recognition. Reflexively, I smiled and nodded back. Apparently, I owed Ajax an apology. "I thought gremlins didn't exist," I commented casually to Gus.
"A lot of folks think that," the gargoyle agreed. "But you can see for yourself. They're real."
I wasn't sure. In the split second I had taken my eyes off the gremlin to speak with Gus, he had vanished without a trace. I was tempted to go looking for him, but Gus was talking again.
"Just a second and I'll introduce you to my partner," he was saying. "He's here somewhere."
As he spoke, the gargoyle began rummaging about his own body, feeling his armpits and peering into the wrinkles on his skin. I watched curiously until my attention was arrested by a small lizard that had crawled out of one of the gargoyle's wing folds and was now regarding me fixedly from Gus's right shoulder. It was only about 3 inches long, but glowed with a brilliant orange hue. There were blotchy red patterns which seemed to crawl about the lizard's skin with a life of their own. The overall effect was startlingly beautiful. "Is that your lizard?" I asked.
"There he is,"
Gus crowed triumphantly, snatching the reptile from his shoulder and cupping it in his hands.
"Meet Burfort. He's the partner I was telling you about."
"Hello, Burfort," I smiled, extending a finger to stroke him. The gargoyle reacted violently, jerking the lizard back out of my reach.
"Careful there," he warned. "That's a good way to lose a finger."
"I wasn't going to hurt him," I explained.
"No, he was about to hurt you," Gus countered. "Burfort's a salamander, a walking firebomb. We get along because I'm one of the few beings around that won't burn to a crisp when I touch him."
"Oh," I said with sudden understanding. "So when you said firepower—"
"I meant firepower," Gus finished. "Burfort cleans 'em out on the ground, and I work 'em over from the air. Well, what do you say? Have we got a deal?"
"I'll, have to talk it over with my partner," I countered.
"Fine," Gus beamed. "I'll start packing."
And he was gone before I could stop him. I sagged against the counter, wishing fervently for Aahz's return. As if in answer to my thoughts, my mentor burst through the door, followed closely by Tanda. My greeting died in my throat when I saw his scowl. Aahz was not in a good mood. "I thought I told you to wait outside," he bellowed at me. "Calm down, Aahz," Tanda soothed. "I thought he'd be more comfortable waiting in here. Besides, there's no reason to get upset. We're here and he's here. Nothing has gone wrong." "You haven't been dealing with any Devils?" Aahz asked suspiciously. "I haven't even talked with any," I protested. "Good," he retorted, slightly mollified. "There's hope for you yet, kid." "I told you he could stay out of trouble," Tanda smiled triumphantly. "Isn't that right, handsome?" Try as I might, I couldn't bring myself to answer her.